Magnus the Red, born among the stars, found himself cast onto the remote world of Prospero, a heaven for psychers who had fled persecution throughout the galaxy. From a young age, Magnus displayed unmatched psychic potential, quickly surpassing his mentors and mastering the arcane arts of the warp. Under the guidance of the psyker scholar Aemon, Magnus led a campaign to rid Prospero of the Psyche-Nuine, psychic predators who ravaged the planet. In this victory, he cemented himself as Prospero's savior and ruler, transforming its capital, Tisca, into a city of beauty and knowledge, where the pursuit of psychic power and understanding became a central cultural pillar. Despite his relative isolation on Prospero, Magnus had always been connected to the Emperor through their shared psychic abilities. Their bond, formed long before they physically met, was unique among the Primarchs. When the Emperor finally arrived on Prospero during the Great Crusade, father and son greeted each other not as strangers, but as long-lost companions. The Emperor, recognizing Magnus's unmatched psychic prowess, offered him command of the Thousand Sons, a legion of Astartes who, like Magnus, were struggling with their psychic mutations. With his powerful intellect and determination, Magnus believed he could guide his legion into mastering the warp, ushering humanity into a new age of psychic evolution. Magnus's reunion with the Emperor set him on a path toward greatness, but it also marked the beginning of his tragic fall. The Emperor's warning about the dangers of the warp were clear, but Magnus's confidence in his ability to control such powers blinded him to the growing risks. While Magnus aimed to bring enlightenment to humanity, the forces of chaos were already weaving their tendrils around him, slowly steering him towards his eventual damnation. Upon reuniting with the Thousand Sons, Magnus was greeted with both hope and despair. His legion, crippled by the rampant genetic mutation known as the Flesh Change, stood on the brink of destruction. Using his vast psychic abilities, Magnus found what he believed to be a cure, saving his legion from extinction and solidifying his role as their savior. The Thousand Sons became a reflection of Magnus' ideals: scholars, warriors, and masters of psychic power. Under Magnus's leadership, the Thousand Sons made great strides during the Great Crusade, conquering worlds not just through brute force, but through diplomacy and the manipulation of the warp, offering peace and enlightenment to those willing to join the Imperium. Magnus maintained a complex relationship with his brother Primarchs. He had strong bonds with Horus, who admired his intellect, and Lorgar, with whom he shared a fascination for the esoteric. However, his use of sorcery alienated him from Primarchs like Mortarion and Leman Russ, who viewed such powers as dangerous and unnatural. Tensions with Russ, in particular, grew after their confrontation on Arc reached Secundus, where Russ's distrust of Magnus nearly escalated into violence. Their enmity would come to define much of Magnus's later downfall, as their ideologies of strength versus sorcery clashed repeatedly. The most pivotal moment of this period was the Council of Nicaea, where Magnus faced judgment for his legion's use of psychic powers. With many of his brothers opposing the use of sorcery, Magnus passionately defended the role of psychers, arguing that they were the future of humanity. However, despite his eloquence, the Emperor sided with the conservative faction, banning all forms of sorcery and disbanding the Librarius programs across the legions. Though the Emperor's edict struck a deep blow to Magnus, he outwardly accepted the ruling. Yet, in secret, he continued his research, convinced that the Imperium's survival depended on mastering the warp, not shunning it. Magnus's loyalty to the Emperor was tested when he discovered Horus's betrayal and the impending Horus Heresy. Using his psychic powers, Magnus attempted to warn the Emperor of the War Master's treachery, but in doing so, he unknowingly committed his greatest sin. Magnus forcibly projected his consciousness into Terra through the webway, unaware that his intrusion would destroy the Emperor's top-secret project to secure humanity's future. His psychic breach allowed demons to invade the webway, shattering the Emperor's work and causing irreparable damage. Furious at Magnus's recklessness, the Emperor banished him from Terra, condemning him for his folly. In response, the Emperor dispatched Lemon Russ and the Space Wolves to arrest Magnus and bring him to Terra. However, under the influence of Horus, Russ was convinced to destroy Prospero instead. What followed was the burning of Prospero, a brutal and merciless assault that decimated the Thousand Sons. Magnus, who had resigned himself to his fate, watched in despair as the city of Tisca, his life's work, was reduced to ashes. When Russ and Magnus finally clashed, the battle was fierce, but in the end, Magnus was mortally wounded. In a last desperate act, he used his psychic power to transport his surviving sons into the Eye of Terror, abandoning the Imperium and sealing his fate as a servant of Tzeentch. During the latter stages of the heresy, Magnus would join the traitors in their assault on Terra. However, his involvement was less out of loyalty to Horus and more out of his personal vendetta against the Emperor. Magnus's role in the siege of the Webway and his involvement in the final battles marked him as one of the most powerful figures of the heresy. Even though his heart was full of regret for the path he had taken, his transformation into a Daemon Prince of Tzeentch by the end of the heresy ensured his eternal existence as a being of the warp, no longer fully mortal, but consumed by the power he once sought to master. Aftermath of the Horus Heresy, Magnus withdrew to the planet of Sorceress within the Eye of Terror, where he continued his pursuit of knowledge and power. Now a Daemon Prince of Tzeentch, he ruled over his shattered legion, the Thousand Sons, who had become even more twisted and mutated by the powers of chaos. Despite his transformation, Magnus's grudges against the Emperor and the Space Wolves burned brightly, leading to several attempts to strike at the Imperium in the millennia that followed, such as the infamous siege of the Fenris system. Magnus's legacy is one of both tragedy and arrogance. He believed himself to be one of the Primarchs who could guide humanity into a new era of psychic mastery. Yet his refusal to heed the Emperor's warnings led to his downfall. His actions during the heresy, particularly the destruction of the Webway project, are seen as pivotal moments that contributed to the Imperium's precarious state in the 41st millennium. Still, to his followers, Magnus remains a visionary, a symbol of the potential that humanity could have achieved if only they had embraced the power of the warp. In the current age of the Dark Imperium, Magnus continues to play an active role, using his powers to further Tzeentch schemes and oppose the Imperium. His ambitions to reshape reality according to his own vision remains undiminished, and his influence over the Thousand Sons ensures that his legacy as the Crimson King endures, both feared and revered in equal measure.